What are you trying to tell me? That I can dodge bullets?
No, Neo. I'm trying to tell you that when you're ready, you won't have to.
Today we've got some indie comic book news. Now, first up, I will say this. Berserker is going to be delayed. But the good news is it's not nearly as bad as initially reported. We also have an update on ENIAC #1, the first comic book published from Bad Idea with their new concept of direct-to-retailer, going outside of Diamond. Obviously, this is their first time sending out a comic book. And there's been some issues along the way. It's not going to be a full print run. Going to have details on that. And also, we have signs that maybe, just perhaps, the comic book industry is getting back to normal at the pandemic shutdown. There were measures enacted coming out of the pandemic shutdown that Image Comics put into place, and they are removing that. Now, you could see that as a bad thing for retailers, but it is a good thing overall that they no longer feel that they need to do that. So before I get into the details, I do want to say, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, hit me a thumbs up if you enjoy this video, hit a thumbs down if you don't. Either way, I want to hear your thoughts. Now let's get right into it. It was initially reported that Keanu Reeves BRZRKR from Boom Studios, obviously written by Matt Kindt, illustrated by the wonderful Ron Garney, which is breaking records. It is the most sold comic book since 2015, since Star Wars #1, at 615,000 copies and counting, was going to be delayed by an entire month. That was retracted, and then it was said it was going to be delayed by 2 weeks, and then that was further retracted. Instead of coming out on February 24th, it is going to come out on March 3rd. Unless, here's the caveat, unless you're getting one of the 2 foil covers by Rafael Grampa or Mark Brooks. Those are still being delayed by a full month to March 24th. Obviously, this is a big deal for Boom Studios. We know that IDW has their TMNT The Last Ronin series, had major issues as far as their first print run. This feels a lot different than that. I think IDW majorly underestimated the amount of interest in TMNT The Last Ronin. And their print run was smaller than it needed to be because of essentially their ineptitude. Whereas Boom Studios, obviously, I don't think that they anticipated 615,000 comics and counting on the first print run being ordered. They've never had a comic printing this large. They've obviously ran into some logistical issues, specifically with the foil covers. Those are going to take a further month just to get everything out correctly. But they are moving the print run back, or the release date, a week, so they can get it right, and then everyone can get a good functional copy of Berserker #1. It is a good sign as far as Boom Studios and their logistical operations that they can have a setback and not be kind of dead in the water. IDW feels like they're still recovering from, I wouldn't call it a botch. They still made a lot of money, and they're selling lots of second and third prints on their Last Ronin. But we still haven't got the second issue, which is supposed to have been out already, I think, twice. But it feels like Boom Studios is probably handling this a lot better. And the reason that Boom cited for this delay was to ensure that our printer is able to fulfill this tall order while maintaining the level of quality that you have come to expect from a Boom Studios single issue. Boom Studios has printers, likely more than one, across America, probably into Canada. And this order was so large, it ended up being a little bit too much for their normal partners. And I imagine they had to give them an extra week just to kind of to make up for it. So if you're excited for Berserker #1, you are going to have to wait a week. Now, that is not the only logistical issue that we've had with independent comics lately. We do have word out that ENIAC #1 from Matt Kindt, who obviously is doing Berserker, and Doug Braithwaite on art, 2 men that were heavily associated with Valiant Comics during the Dinesh Shamdasani, Warren Simmons days. Obviously, this is the first comic book being published by Bad Idea. Dinesh, Warren Simmons' new comic book venture. This is a new concept as far as an independent comic company. They're not going through Diamond. They're doing their own distribution, and they're doing very limited distribution to select retailers throughout the country. I believe they might have just announced some select retailers throughout the world. So They are expanding the program as we move along. This feels like it was announced a lifetime ago. I think this was announced before the first pandemic shutdown. But they're finally getting out there. Obviously, they did have the hero trade, which I believe was a freebie. I believe that was sent out to retailers that were part of the program to let them know what was coming up and to thank them for their support of the program. And then this is what they had to say and what they sent out to their retail partners. We want to thank you for your patience these last few days, especially to those who reached out to try and help solve this issue by offering to lower your orders. The retailers heard Bad Idea was going to have a very hard time meeting their print run, and some of them offered to come out and lower their orders. This is what they said. Unfortunately, the gulf has proved too large, and we will not have enough copies of ENIAC #1 first printing to fulfill all orders completely. We have been working with our printer to rush shipment on our planned first batch of not first printings. Nevertheless, we will have to allocate all current orders to 51% of your initial order. So if your comic shop ordered 100 issues of ENIAC #1, they're getting 51. If they ordered 10, they're getting 5. This is definitely a downer, especially I imagine there's a lot of scarcity and there will be rarity for this comic book and really all of the Bad Idea comics for the foreseeable future. That I imagine almost all of these copies were likely spoken for already. So probably half of their customers aren't going to be able to get these, which will be really disappointing when they have to explain to some of their pull list customers, maybe some of their long time hardcore readers, like, hey, we don't have enough to fulfill all the orders. We had to pick half the people not to fulfill, and you're one of them. I imagine that conversation won't go very well, but they will fulfill eventually. This is what they had to follow up on that. On a positive note, we will be able to automatically fulfill the remainder of your ENIAC #1 order with ENIAC #1, not first printing copies. While we know this is not optimal for your hardcore collectors, we do hope it will cover some ground with reader demand. Based on our conversations with many of you over the last months, we project this allocation will cover most, if not all, of your pre-orders with first prints. If you wish to opt out of this substitution, you can email us. It goes into some more details as far as retailers and their agreements with Bad Idea. Obviously, we're not specifically interested in that part. Now, this is not ideal, like Dinesh Samdasani and the management at Bad Idea said, but this is literally the first time they've ever done this before. It's their first time printing, first time distributing. There has been a snafu. Hopefully, essentially ENIAC #1 is a trial run. It has not gone optimally or even well. I would say that when you only hit 51% of your print run, that is a major mistake. Now, hopefully, they will learn from their mistakes. They will be able to improve their processes over time. And when we get the first issues of Tankers and some of the other Bad Idea miniseries that are coming up in the near future over the next year, they will come out on time with full print runs. It is not going to happen for ENIAC #1. For those of you that are hardcore collectors and you wanted a first print, I hope it worked out for you and your shop had you prioritized and you're able to get that first print. But it does sound like at least half of the people that had this on the pull list are not going to be getting first prints. And that does suck. Now, last but not least, well, maybe least, it's certainly as far as everything going on that we've just talked about, it might be the least interesting, but Image has decided to end their line-wide returnability program when they came out of the pandemic shutdown. I'll be honest. DC did some good things with bringing on new distribution. They had a lot of big titles coming out the block. Marvel just kind of stood there idly by and started releasing less comics and kind of messed up their whole publishing plan. And that's been a whole nother bag of worms. But really, it was the independent comics that really stepped to the forefront as far as helping retailers out, helping the industry out. Image was definitely at the front of that. One of the big measures that they did implement was they were no longer just going to have the no risk #1 program, where essentially there's select titles that will all have returnability, I believe, for the first 4 issues. that everything was going to have returnability, which is good for the retailers. It allows them to order more robustly without risking quite as much. Obviously they get the returns back. Now, the returnability program, from what I'm told at Diamond, is not all that efficient, and it does take you a while to get your returns back, but at least you'll get your money back when you return the comics eventually. This is a good sign that the comic book industry is getting back to some type of normalcy after the pandemic shutdown. Obviously, there was a large amount of uncertainty just as far as the comic industry in general. We probably still won't know the full extent of the ramifications of everything probably for another year, but I certainly thought we were going to see much worse things coming out of this. Sales have been better than anticipated, and obviously Image feels like the retailers are in a good enough spot that they no longer need across-the-board returnability. I imagine a lot of retailers wish they just would have kept it in place, and honestly, I think returnability should probably have some place as far as the comic book industry is dealings with their partners, but that is debatable. Now, there were other independent publishers that changed their returnability programs. It will be interesting to see if they follow an Image Comics lead and start rolling back some of those measures that they implemented coming out of the pandemic shutdown. But it does feel like we are getting back to business as usual. Marvel is back to releasing lots of number ones. They're back to announcing lots of events, so they're kind of getting back to business as usual. They haven't quite gotten up to the publishing of like 100 or 120 new comics in a month, but I imagine they'll be there by the middle of the year. DC Comics obviously have changed their business moving forward. I don't know that we're going to get quite back to normal, but that is a very bat-centric comic line moving forward. And the indies seem to be kind of getting back to normal. Although I will say this, as far as the numbers we're seeing from the big independent titles that people are excited about, they are blowing people's minds. They're much bigger than we had seen in a very, very long time as far as independent comics. So I do think 2021, 2022 will be the year of the indies, and we'll see how things go. I think Boom's making a really good go at it. Image is doing some really good stuff. And we know that we are also getting 2 shared superhero universes, one from AWA, one from Image themselves, which I believe launches this week with Radiant Black. If you enjoy independent comics, I will be reviewing Radiant Black from Kyle Higgins right here on the channel, likely tomorrow. Obviously, that comic is published by Image. Now, just to kind of wrap it up, like we mentioned before, the initial reports about the delays on Berserker #1 from Keanu Reeves at Boom Studios were overblown. It's not delayed by 4 weeks. Most issues are delayed by 1 week in total, unless you got the foil covers from Raphael Grandpa and Mark Brooks. Those are delayed for an entire month. Bad Idea had some snafus as far as their first print of ENIAC #1. This is the first comic that they are publishing and selling to their customers. They were only able to produce 51% of their initial orders for that first print run. Obviously, this is not ideal. Hopefully, they learn from these mistakes. They improve their processes over time, and they learn how to execute their distribution plan as far as what they are going to be moving forward as an independent comic publisher. And things look to be returning back to normal. Image Comics will no longer be offering returnability across the line. They still will have their no-risk #1 program, but everything else is back to normal. And I think we're going to see the other independent publishers start following their lead and kind of rolling back some of these measures and getting back to normal, which it feels like we're doing anyway.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.